Welcome to Tech Captains, the podcast where we explore the stories of today's tech captains. I'm Ron Danenberg, and along with Gareth Thomas, we're excited to bring you insights from visionaries shaping our digital future. And today we're joined by Niranjan, the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Nintex. Leading a global team is driving innovation in automation through low-code, no-code, and AI. Nintex is a leader in process intelligence, helping over 10,000 organizations worldwide to accelerate the digital transformation. Niranjan has also held key roles at Avalara and Expedia, and I saw that we were at Expedia at the same time, uh, where he led the significant product and platform initiatives. His diverse background spans engineering roles at Microsoft and AMD to strategic consulting at BCG. So Niranjan, welcome to Tech Captains.
Glad to be here. Excited for the discussion.
Thank you. I mean, we're eager to hear about your journey and insights on the future of automation and digital transformation. So, I mean, maybe to start, Niranjan, AI is a hot topic in process automation. Can you share how AI is being integrated into Nintex products and why automation is considered a necessary precursor to AI?
Yeah, happy to. So AI is all the buzz. I think there's been several podcasts on AI, I assume, already. I think AI is very critical to the automation space because it ultimately serves as a form of automation in some form. So I'll say two things. For the first question, how AI is being integrated into Nintex platform, there's two forms to it. Customers and partners use our platform to build applications to automate various kinds of things. It could be automation of HR processes, automation of finance processes, etc. So a big part of where AI is useful is in the design time creation of apps, right? So this could be create me an application to build licensing applications, or create me a workflow for automating employee onboarding, etc., etc. So there's a lot of create functions within our platform, and AI becomes a very natural sort of enabler for that. And we think about it as individual piece components for document automation, workflow creation, RPA, etc., etc., but also as a orchestrator across, where AI could actually help create across multiple domains and bring it together for the customer. So that's the design time side. There's also a significant use at runtime, because ultimately these applications are getting deployed by our customers to be used by their customers, who can also benefit from AI. So these customers may have created custom models, or we may give them what we call AI workers, which is, summarize a document, or maybe there might be a custom underwriting AI solution. And all of these live at the nodes of automation, and our platform is able to bring this together in a form that is useful for the customer. So that's what we call like runtime AI insertion. And there's a lot of work going on to figure out like how do we start inserting innovation done by our customers, or things that are in the market that can enable runtime enablement.
So just maybe I'll go back here a bit, but for people who are listening right now, when they hear automation, like general automation of all possible processes, they might think of a Zapier, but Zapier might be more like a small business or consumer. I don't know if you want to explain a bit the difference and how Nintex positions itself here.
Correct. Yes. So it's a good call out. We are more of a enterprise sort of business level automation capability. And so use cases, there's a variety of use cases, but typically financial services, there's a lot of, think of a bank automating loan applications as an example, right? There are several things that happen in that process where you are creating or inviting applications from the users or the consumers. There might be a portal where the loan application happens, and we have capabilities to build these portals. It goes through multiple approval steps through different departments. And so our orchestration capabilities help sort of manage that with certain rules. There might be some data manual data transfers happening from legacy bank systems into the workflow process where we can use RPA. There are loan documents being created, so you use document automation to do that at scale. There's signature at the end of every process, authorization from the customer, authorization from the underwriter, etc. So all of these things come together to actually automate a process. And that's basically our bread and butter. That's where we help automate sort of business process. It could be back office or front of office, but it's more business level productivity.
I see, makes sense. And so if I talk about the industry trends here, from your perspective, what are the most significant trends in process automation today? And how are you positioning the tech team, to stay ahead of these trends?
Yeah, so I think the two big trends that I would call out, one is convergence of automation capabilities. So historically, if you see, the market was there were several categories to the market. So you will have like low code app dev, and it's all about sort of building powerful user engagement applications. Or you may have workflow automation, or you may have RPA, or you may have document. All of this is by and large converging into a larger sort of business process orchestration suite. And customers are looking for almost singular platforms that can stitch all of this together, because they don't think about it as piece parts anymore. So that is one theme, and a lot of our effort at Nintex, because we have all these capabilities, is focused on bringing that together in a form that is very seamless for the customers to use. That is one. And the second piece is something we already talked about, is AI. Ultimately, customers want to know what value can you generate and how quickly can you generate it for me. And so with AI coming into the picture, the value equation becomes stronger and the time to value also reduces. And so that is the other trend, is how do we enable technology that is happening right now to increase the value lever in both these directions. So I would say, I would call out those are probably the two big areas. And for Nintex, those are also very square and center investment areas.
And so Niranjan, I'm guessing the size of your company, I'm just curious, what sort of tech stacks, because I'm guessing you're probably running lots of different tech stacks, and then maybe talk a bit about that. And then the question I actually had was, scalability around sort of complex high volume workflows, because I would imagine your demand is not predictable and it's 24/7. So maybe talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so the tech stacks is an interesting, it would be cool if you were very consistent, but that is not the case. Right. Nintex has also grown through acquisitions, and the nature of acquisitions is you get a little bit of a smorgasbord of technology snacks. But generally, there's a lot of C#.NET, there is a lot of Python, Node.js, React, Angular, front end. So there's a little bit of an assortment. There's even on the infrastructure side, we have a lot of Nintex is sort of standardized on Azure, but we also have AWS. There's a couple of acquisitions we've done that are very focused on AWS. And by nature of sort of anchoring to these infrastructure platforms, we also end up using some of their PaaS. Like we'll use managed instances of certain technologies that are very Azure specific, like Cosmos DB as an example so now we are very coupled to Azure. And then similarly on the AWS side, we have very technologies that are coupled to the AWS ecosystem. Over time, we will try to sort of reconcile this so that we get greater flexibility as we look to scale, but it is certainly assorted right now.
So are you saying then that most are you saying most of your infrastructure then is Azure with some AWS basically? Okay.
Yeah, and it's very product specific, I would say. It's rarely divergent within a product domain, but it is certainly by product it varies, and it's a very much a result of acquisitions.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the second question you asked about scalability, there's a big focus inside the company around scalability and resilience. And so we have a very regular cadence on looking at our forecast based on what we predict and then putting some sort of buffer limits to it to say, okay, can we test the system 2x, 3x inside at a service level? And then we are also putting a lot of focus as we are bringing these capabilities together is can we test across the system, which is where oftentimes, as you would know, a lot of the fault areas lie within the seams. And then if you don't have robust system testing capabilities, as we deliver seamless systems to the customer, this becomes a challenge. So starting to put a lot of focus into system level scalability as well.
And have you sort of done anything where you're taking your DevOps and sort of focusing on site reliability engineering as a kind of segment of that?
Yeah, we also have so historically we had DevOps within the teams, and so each team was managing their own deployments. It was all automated but managed within the teams, and we are actually spinning up a major effort to have our own sort of deployment paths, if you would, so that you can offload a lot of these management of infrastructure into a central team, such that the teams themselves can purely focus on delivery of capabilities within the domain.
Okay.
And then within that team, there's a lot of focus on SRE as well as platform engineering.
So you mentioned a lot of different technologies, obviously, but how do you organize the team around all these technologies? Like, do you have cross-team, like every team is responsible for specific technologies, for specific parts of the products? It depends. How does that go?
So far the teams have been very product aligned. And so because these technologies are the variation in technology is primarily a result of product domains, it's been consistent within product areas. Starting last year and primarily going into the next year, there's going to be a lot of focus on having a very clear segmented platform team, which brings together, the usual suspects of what you would consider platform, like authentication, data, notifications, all the common services, as well as your front end. And so this is where we'll have to make some choices on, okay, what service becomes the platform service and serves everyone. And you'll start to see some sort of cross-domain interaction because, for example, if your authentication service is deployed in Azure, now you're going to have and is built with a certain technology, it's going to service regardless of what the product is built on and where it is deployed. And so that's some of the discussions we are starting to have, and it has implications on deployment. It has implications on cross-infrastructure traffic and how do you manage entry and exits between different infrastructure lines, etc. So that's things that are becoming more real as we are starting to converge into a real platform. And we'll have to make some of those choices as a result of it. But ultimately, if I were to think about at a macro level, it is a service that is serving other needs. And so as long as we make that service performant, I think it should work out just fine.
In terms of younger developers, younger member of your teams who are starting their career in tech, joining your team, what's the best advice you can give them to learn and to progress?
My advice to everyone who's starting out their careers, regardless of whether it's at Nintex or elsewhere, is to focus on learning and sort of use that as the anchor point for all the decisions they are making on a day-to-day basis, on a monthly basis, on an yearly basis. And the learning can happen in very different ways. It could be learning different technologies. It could be learning through different projects. It could be learning different contexts. There are things you learn from a very startup-y environment where you're trying to find product market fit and you're very sort of rapidly iterating, versus in scaled organizations where you learn about scale and managing hyperscale and how do you design systems for scale. So that could be a different kind of learning through different industries and domains, which is what sort of I've been fortunate in my career with. And by doing that, you learn patterns that work in one that might be useful in another. So, and I think the other benefit of learning is also, if you anchor on learning, you don't actually dwell on too many failures and you're actually willing to take some chances because it gives you the most learning. it also anchors you beyond the usual, hierarchy, compensation, etc., because early in your career, it's very important to have diversity of experiences that will carry you through eventually. So that's generally been my advice, is don't be afraid to fail. But the reason for that is so that you can learn and you can accelerate and get good density of learnings early in your career.
And so talking about careers, it's interesting because yours, you started out, I mean, you're quite technical background. I think you have an MS in engineering. You started out as a software engineer. How have you found the transition into a more of a product role? Was it natural? Was that something you wanted to do? Did you fall into it? What was that process?
Yeah, so I had an interesting transition from engineering. I actually went to management consulting after business school. And so it was a very hard transition from, a very builder focused, delivery focused mindset to a environment where you're solving very broad-based business problems. Like at BCG, you're advising the C-suite on very strategy-oriented issues. And there were two very, very interesting learnings from that whole experience. One was the ability to sort of ramp up on a new domain and find impact. What will drive business impact? And the second piece was the ability to influence an organization without authority. So you're entering like an organization where you have zero credibility. You probably spent about 6 months in that domain, but you're starting to advise senior leaders on what to do. It's a very interesting craft and skill set to build. And so as I was looking to, and my goal was always to come back to tech, but as I was looking for transition back into the tech industry, I felt having the technical background plus the business sort of mindset as well as the ability to sort of influence across lent itself to a good sort of product role, because you can kind of, your goal is to deliver business impact, but you have to be technical enough to influence engineering teams as well as your stakeholders. Yeah. So that was the transition. But eventually, like through progression, like ultimately I started owning both product and technology teams, allowing me to sort of drive impact holistically. And probably that is the space I love being, because there are parts of me that are still love to geek out about technologies and I can go deep with engineers. And then there are parts of me that gets excited about the possibilities that we can deliver with these, which is a very product centric mindset. And it allows me to straddle depending on the mood of the day. So
yeah. And what do you think? What do you think the biggest misconception then that so people in engineering have now about product? Because I think for any tech business to be successful, they have to work really closely together, right, to deliver features.
I think it depends on who the counterpart is. Oftentimes what I feel is engineers feel that the product folks don't fully understand what the art of the possible is, and sometimes may not understand what the customers fully want. So there's a lot of time that is sort of gone in questioning whether this is the right thing or not. And product managers, because they are sort of at the core of managing so many things, how to prove to everyone that they are right, and that sort of impedes velocity. The other symptom that I've also seen in organizations, which I'm actively sort of driving culture around even at Nintex, is this notion of where the boundaries are. And there's a lot of focus on, okay, what does a product manager do and where does it end, and where does a product designer or a UXer start, and where does an engineer start? And oftentimes you'll see a symptom where it becomes a very departmental stamp of approval, saying, oh, I wrote requirements and now you can take it. Oh, these are not very detailed, so can you go back and refine them? Versus going into a culture where, okay, you have people who have spikes in capabilities, but ultimately your joint goal is to drive velocity in the market and find the right balance depending on the skill sets. If the engineering team understands exactly what to build, you can get out of the way and have them build it. There's no need for everybody to sort of opine. And likewise, there might be situations where maybe the product designer and the engineer can actually launch the feature. All the PM needs to do is just describe the problem at a high level. So building that maturity, and there's no way to actually write that down, you can describe it in many words, but it's a lived culture. And to me, like that interaction pattern is the actual unlock to driving high performing teams, such that they can all sort of work for each other, and if one is not there, the other can actually take on and still drive the teams.
And Niranjan, we have a tradition in this podcast that the guest will present a book, and the book that you wanted to recommend today is The Right Call: What Sports Teach Us About Work and Life by Sally Jenkins. And I saw that you did tennis at university.
Yes. So I'm a big nerd about drawing inspiration from sports into work, and this is a book that actually does that in spades. And I think I read this about like 6 or 8 months ago. Takes a lot of examples and talks about preparation, strategy, culture. How do you build grit? Which was probably the thing that resonated for me the most. There's an example about Michael Phelps and how he trains, and how he trains at the edge of his performance limits. So he'll train till he's tired, and then he'll push himself to perform when, his brain is not quite there, he's super tired. And it actually builds resilience in tough times. And that's basically the takeaway. I think it's a theme that comes across a few times in the book. If you've caught on Federer's recent commencement speech, which is probably making the rounds, he talks about that too. There's a theme in his talk about effortless is a myth, and he talks about how you train rigorously so that in very trying times you appear calm because you've seen it so many times. So I like those analogies. Look, I've played sports myself, and I think it teaches you a lot about life and work. And I thought it was a fantastic book just to draw some parallels if you like sports. I think that's probably the caveat here. Like, if you're not a sports person, maybe it's not the book, but if you like sports, it's a great analogy that draws contrast between sports and work and life. And
well, I saw that Federer clip. So I think, wasn't he talking on there about how not focusing on the point you've just lost?
He has a few themes. The first one is effortless is a myth, where he talks about like training for being effortless. The second one is the it is just a point. I think that's what he says. And
yes,
he talks about not dwelling on the point. I think he gives the analogy of he's won 80% of his games, but only 54% of his points. And makes the point that even like the top tennis players are only winning about half the points, and it's not worth thinking twice about the point you lost and just moving on and learning from it.
I think there is a huge amount to learn from sport in business. I'm a big Formula One fan, and you look at some of the stuff that Formula One teams do and how they operate. I mean, it's extraordinary. You have 20 of the best drivers in the world, and they're separated on a lap by hundredths of a second. It's the craziest sport. It's the craziest sport. So just go back to your career, because again, it was interesting. So you've had this quite varied career. You worked on the Xbox, I think. You worked for Expedia. You were at AMD. I mean, those are some big, well-known companies, some great products. What was the hardest technical challenge that you faced in all of that? Is there anything that particularly comes to mind?
I think the coolest technical challenge, which I guess I could equate to hardest as well, was Xbox. I worked on the Kinect product, which unfortunately doesn't sell, but I think it was a very compelling technology.
That's the one where you stood in front of it, right, with your hat?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically hands-free. But if you think about the technology behind it, like just the image recognition that goes through and the level of sophistication you need behind the scenes to recognize actions and translate that into gaming input is fairly sophisticated. I think that's probably one of the most interesting, complex challenge that I still sort of go back to. I mean, there's been several as I've gone through Expedia, etc., like scaling challenges, etc. But I just fundamentally come down to like the level of complexity that you had to solve for there. it's one that sticks out for me.
And what specifically was so hard about it? Well, I mean, because you were pushing the hardware, I think, as well, wouldn't you? And the sort of limits of, at the time, I guess, vision recognition and stuff like that. Is that where the real difficulty was?
It is where the difficulty is, and you're also trying to balance out the variation in input. So if you think about gaming construct before that, gaming inputs are very deterministic because it comes from a console, right? Like you are not, you exactly know what the input is into the game, versus this is kind of the first time your gaming input is very stochastic in nature. It's a person standing in front of you. Heights may be different, widths may be different, their actions may be different, how they gesture may be different. And you're trying to capture that into a very deterministic input into the game such that the game can react to it, which is a very different challenge than what gaming used to be before. And so I think that probably, there's a lot of hardware and software goes behind the algorithms, but I feel that was probably the hardest challenge to overcome, is to get to a good enough where the gamer feels like, okay, truly what they are doing is truly reflected in the game. It wasn't an easy challenge 14 years ago when,
wow, was it that long ago? Wow.
Only 15, 16 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then I just have one last question, which was about your product suite. So you have quite a few different products. The one I found really interesting was you have this thing called Nintex Process Discovery. Can you just talk a little bit? How does that work exactly?
So it is again, coming back to image recognition. So the gist of what it tries to do is you can deploy bots inside of clients. So like your desktop computer, etc. And you can do that at scale. Okay. It captures what is happening inside the client, and it sends all the images with the metadata into a central server that then recognizes patterns and stitches it into a process. So it identifies what is happening in organizations and deciphers what process is running. And if you think about the value to the business is, it helps discover the process that is running, but it also tells you about variations between person to person and how they're implementing the process. So it is used both for discovery of processes to understand, okay, what we thought should be 4 steps, is it actually taking 8 or 10 or 15 steps to actually accomplish in real time in the organization? And the second piece it tries to solve for is there a lot of variation person to person, or are people generally compliant with what is supposed to be done? It uses very pre-Gen AI. This is a fairly sophisticated use of CNNs for image recognition. And so it uses a lot of image recognition technology to consolidate it and offer insights to the customer. It's called process and task mining in the industry. So a lot of companies have this technology. They use different techniques to do it, but that's the terminology that the industry goes by.
Oh, very cool. Okay, so it's like a macro generator, but very, very sophisticated, and it's comparing what it thinks people are doing in a task to what it's actually seeing across a lot of people, essentially.
It doesn't think, so there is no input to it so it is actually, it's purely observing and then deciphering.
Okay.
So there is actually no bias there's no prompt, so to speak, into the system to say, this is what you're looking for, although that can actually be an enhancement to the process. It is purely capturing what you're doing and trying to club what seems similar, and then deciphering, okay, here's the process that is being run through metadata and other things.
Okay.
Very interesting, and I suppose we will finish on this. So Niranjan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, this was fun, and look forward to the next discussion whenever that happens.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Niranjan.
Take care.